The millionaire unexpectedly showed up at his daughter's school, planning a surprise to have lunch with her. However, the scene that unfolded before him when he stepped into the cafeteria haunted him for months. Take a deep breath and settle in to hear this tale. I truly hope it will be the perfect catalyst for a restful night's sleep. Let's begin. Richard Coleman lived in a sprawling estate on the outskirts of the city, a place that was always so tidy it felt sterile. He left home each morning before dawn and returned only after the streetlights cast long shadows on his front steps. Dinner was often a reheated meal prepared by Mrs. Turner, the housekeeper who had been with the family for over 10 years. On the dining table, the small seat reserved for Lily, his 8-year-old daughter, always held a polished set of silverware, yet most of the time it remained untouched. Lily was a quiet child, sometimes sitting for hours by the window, sketching the backyard garden with a broken pencil tip. Mrs. Turner adored the girl like her own granddaughter, often making her warm milk and encouraging her to play outside. But Lily would simply shake her head, saying she wanted to wait for her father to get home. Richard, though he loved his daughter, believed that as long as she attended the best schools and had everything she needed, things would be fine. He called it love through responsibility. During the rare parent-teacher conferences he managed to attend, Richard met Madeline Brooks, Lily's homeroom educator. A woman in her early 30s, she had soft eyes and always spoke with careful consideration. On that day, Madeline mentioned that Lily was quite bright, just a little shy, and needed a bit more attention from her father. The comment made Richard feel awkward. He realized he knew next to nothing about his daughter's school days, what she liked to eat or who she played with. A few days later, Madeline sent a note thanking him for attending the conference and reiterating Lily's artistic talent. Subsequent emails were brief check-ins, sometimes including photos of Lily working in a group or participating in the art club. Her writing style made him feel relieved, as if someone was helping him look out for his child. From that point on, Richard began to pay more attention to the woman. Madeline's first visit to the house was when Lily was feeling under the weather. She brought along toast and a jar of honey, mentioning that the little one often doesn't eat much at school. Richard was grateful, while Mrs. Turner simply stood by the kitchen door, her gaze heavy with unspoken thought. After that, Madeline visited more frequently, sometimes for Lily's birthday, other times for a children's art exhibit. She knew how to speak delicately, showing just enough care while maintaining a distance that put Richard at ease. One afternoon, as Lily was coloring an unfinished drawing, Madeline sat down beside her and gently spoke about how the child needs a maternal figure. Richard heard it and remained silent for a long time. He knew she was right. Everything in this house was orderly, but it lacked warmth. Soon after, their meetings became more regular, sometimes at a coffee shop, occasionally at school, and sometimes just for a few minutes at the front gate. Each time she left, Madeline conveyed a sense of comfort, making him believe he could start over. Mrs. Turner noticed the change clearly. She didn't voice her concerns, but watched Madeline with suspicion. Once, when Madeline held Lily's hand near the doorway, the smile on her face didn't quite reach her eyes. Mrs. Turner reported this to Richard, but he dismissed her as overly skeptical. He insisted, "Madeline is a good person. She truly cares about Lily." The housekeeper didn't argue. She just quietly poured tea. A few months later, the papers ran the headline, "Millionaire Coleman finds new happiness." The wedding was a small ceremony, inviting only close relatives and colleagues. Madeline walked down the aisle in a pristine white dress next to Lily. The girl wore a matching dress, but her face was pale. When reporters asked for his thoughts, Richard simply replied, "I'm lucky to have met someone who understands me and cares for my daughter." That night, after the guests had departed, the mansion's living room lights remained on. Mrs. Turner cleared the remnants of the banquet, the sound of china plates clinking softly. Lily stood by the second-floor railing, holding her unfinished sketch, a portrait of her late mother with a gentle smile. She hesitated for a moment, then folded the drawing, placed it in her desk drawer, and replaced it with her father's new wedding photo. Her gaze was melancholic, but no one noticed downstairs. Richard poured wine for Madeline, praising her domestic skills and thoughtfulness. Madeline simply smiled, glancing at the large framed photo hanging in the center of the room. a picture of Richard's first wife holding a young Lily. For a moment, Madeline's smile stiffened, then faded. When Richard went upstairs, Madeline stood alone in the empty kitchen. She opened a cupboard, took down the old picture frame, wiped the dust off the glass, and placed it deep inside a cabinet where no one would see it. Her hand paused for a few seconds, her eyes significantly colder than her usual gentle demeanor. Behind her, the living room clock ticked steadily, each dry beat like a countdown to something unknown. The house now held 3 people, yet the atmosphere felt heavier than before. Lily lay in her room, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. Downstairs, Madeline locked the cabinet, stepped out onto the balcony, the streetlights casting a sharp line of shadow that divided her face into light and dark. In that silence, the house seemed to begin changing, so subtly that no one noticed, but surely and truly. Richard lay in bed, exhausted, but feeling content, believing he had done the right thing. He thought about the future, about Lily having someone to care for her, about the dinner table being filled with laughter. But below, in the corner of the kitchen where the old photo had just been hidden, a flicker of light from a lamp dimmed, then went out completely. As Lily gently turned in her blanket, a single tear slipped from the corner of her eye, landing on the unfinished page on her study desk, a tiny, wobbly inscription she had penned. "I miss you, Mom." In the first few days after the wedding, the house felt infused with new life. Madeline rearranged the living room, changed the curtains, and opted for brighter duvet colors. Richard felt a sense of ease returning home after work, seeing the neatly set dinner table and the soft smile on his new wife's face. He believed everything was heading in the right direction. Lily had a caretaker, and he regained the feeling of having a complete home. Madeline woke up earlier than Mrs. Turner. She often left a note on the table. "I'll pick up Lily today. You don't need to worry about work." In the evenings, she prepared proper meals, asking her husband about his workday. Everything proceeded so smoothly that Richard was convinced his wife was genuinely born to mend the gaps left by time. But beneath that surface, things began to shift. Lily attended school regularly, dressed neatly in her uniform, and smiled when her father said good morning, yet the smile never reached her eyes. Mrs. Turner noticed it first. Whenever Madeline drove up, Lily would shrink back, quickly buttoning her coat and clutching her school bag straps tightly, as if preparing for something she feared. At school, Madeline was highly respected. She knew how to engage parents and deftly pleased the principal. She often told Richard that Lily needed more discipline, not through scolding, but through strict control and rigor. He believed her. To him, discipline was the cornerstone of success, so he had no doubts. Mrs. Turner began to notice Lily was eating less. She would merely touch her spoon to the food a few times before setting it down. When asked, the girl would shake her head, saying she was tired. Some mornings, the housekeeper found her sitting in the kitchen very early, clutching her stomach and sighing softly. One evening, Lily whispered, "If I don't finish my food at school, the teacher will get upset." Mrs. Turner felt a chill, but when she relayed this to Richard, Madeline simply smiled and called it a way to help her overcome laziness. He chuckled, feeling reassured that his wife knew how to raise a child. As time passed, the subtle clues accumulated. Lily often stayed up late studying, her eyes dark-rimmed, her small hands trembling as she held her pencil. She would check her backpack multiple times before leaving for school, as if afraid of forgetting something crucial. One day, Mrs. Turner found small slips of paper in Lily's desk. Messages like, "Don't tell anyone," "Be good," and "Don't make Dad sad." The housekeeper didn't know who wrote them, but the handwriting wasn't Lily's. One morning, Richard rushed off for a business trip. He gave Lily a quick kiss and told Madeline to pick her up late because of a meeting. After he left, Lily sat silently by the window, watching the car drive out of the gate, while Madeline quietly closed the curtains, her voice soft yet sharp. "Go to your room and change now." No one else in the house heard the words. In the days that followed, Mrs. Turner observed that Madeline always picked Lily up early, sometimes even before school was out. When questioned, Madeline explained it was private support sessions for emotionally struggling students. Mrs. Turner felt uneasy but had no grounds to interfere with school matters. Then, Lily started having trouble sleeping. She would wake up in the middle of the night, eyes wide with panic, her hair damp with cold sweat. Mrs. Turner held her, listening to her labored breathing. Lily could only manage a few words. Teacher, punishment, me. Before falling silent again, Mrs. Turner considered calling Richard, but he was abroad at the time, his schedule packed with meetings, and his secretary informed her that he was unavailable for calls. Madeline knew this well. She gradually took control of everything: mealtimes, study hours, and even who Lily talked to. In class, she isolated the girl from her peers, saying Lily needed to focus and concentrate. At home, she required Lily to write a nightly journal of things to fix, which she had to read aloud before dinner. Lily complied obediently, but her hands always shook when she wrote. Other educators noticed Madeline's specialized interest in Lily, but because she had the principal's trust, no one dared to ask questions. A few children in the class mentioned that Lily is often kept behind during lunch, but their words were quickly dismissed. One morning, Mrs. Turner entered the kitchen early and found Lily curled up under the table, her face pale. She whispered, almost breathless, "I don't want to go to school." Mrs. Turner was about to ask more when the sound of a car horn blared outside the gate. Madeline had arrived. The door opened, the sound of high heels clicking steadily on the tile floor. Her perfume permeated the kitchen. Lily tightened her grip on her backpack straps, eyes fixed on the door. Mrs. Turner gently placed a hand on the girl's shoulder, but Lily remained rigid, frozen solid. Madeline stepped in, smiling lightly. "Are you two ready?" She glanced at Lily, then turned to Mrs. Turner. "I'll take the girl. You don't need to worry." Lily nodded, but her eyes were filled with panic. As Madeline took her hand, Mrs. Turner felt a cold dread run down her spine, even though Madeline's smile was as gentle as always. In the morning, sunlight streamed through the curtains, illuminating the polished floor. Richard stood before the mirror adjusting his tie, turning around to see Lily seated on a chair, head bowed, tying her shoelaces. He walked over, intending to kiss her forehead as usual, but she subtly leaned away, pretending to retie a loose knot. He paused momentarily, then offered a strained smile, thinking she was just sleepy. When he asked Madeline, she replied softly, "She's going through a withdrawn phase. I'll help her overcome it. Just let things proceed naturally." The explanation sounded plausible, so he accepted it. Madeline knew how to make everything she said seem credible, and Richard, caught up in the whirlwind of his work, had no time left for doubt. Mrs. Turner thought differently. She observed Lily becoming quieter, eating less, sometimes staring blankly into space. She reported this to Richard, but he merely nodded dismissively, then rushed away from the table when his phone rang. "I'll talk to Madeline about it later," he said, without looking back. In his office, Richard received an email from Madeline, sent to the principal, and copied to him. She reported on the class's academic progress and praised Lily's improvement, attaching a photo of the girl participating in group activities. He opened the picture, seeing his daughter sitting in the corner of the classroom, head bowed low, looking exhausted. But he didn't register this. He only felt proud that his daughter had been mentioned. That evening, he called his wife to thank her, saying how lucky he was to have her by his side. On the other end of the line, Madeline smiled while Lily sat in her room, writing an apology note for eating too slowly and dropping rice on the floor. The next morning, Lily refused breakfast. She clutched her stomach, whispering to Mrs. Turner that her tummy hurt. The housekeeper worried, suggesting she stay home, but Madeline, having just walked downstairs, immediately objected. "Children often make excuses to skip school. I don't want Lily to develop that habit." Mrs. Turner started to protest, but Madeline's gaze silenced her. In the end, Lily had to get into the car, her face pale. As the car pulled away, Mrs. Turner stood watching, her heart heavy with dread. She picked up the phone, intending to call Richard, but then put it down. She knew he was in a meeting, and even if she called, she'd likely receive the cold response, "I'll talk to Madeline later." At school, Madeline's authority became increasingly evident. She often used the title Special Student Manager to isolate Lily from the class. During lunch, she told the cafeteria staff that the girl needed nutritional supervision. No one dared to object because Madeline had the principal's trust. Her words were law. That day, a new employee witnessed Madeline scooping leftover food from an old pot and dumping it onto Lily's tray. When the girl stood still, eyes wide, Madeline simply said, Eat it. Here, every child must learn to be grateful. The employee thought about reporting it, but a colleague pulled her aside, whispering, "Don't get involved. Ms. Brooks has connections with the administration. It's safer to be careful." In the afternoon, Lily came home earlier than usual. She went straight to her room without a word. Mrs. Turner brought up a bowl of soup, finding the girl lying face toward the wall. "Eat something, dear," she said gently. Lily shook her head. The housekeeper placed her hand on the girl's forehead, feeling cold sweat dampening her hair. She sat beside the bed, deeply troubled but unable to do anything else. Late that evening, when Richard returned home, Mrs. Turner met him in the hall, explaining that Lily had persistent stomach pain and was afraid of going to school. He frowned briefly, but before he could speak, Madeline emerged from the living room, holding a cup of tea. "She was fine at school," she said. "She might be pretending to get a day off. Kids do that a lot." Richard glanced at his watch. He had a call scheduled with a European partner. "I'll talk to her later," he replied, heading straight into his study. Mrs. Turner stood still, feeling as if she had spoken into a void. Night descended, and the house fell silent. Lily woke up suddenly, gripped by sharp, cramping pain. She got out of bed, her bare feet touching the cold floor of the hallway. The light from the living room was barely enough to illuminate her small, trembling shoulders. She whispered, "Dad," but only the sound of wind through the door crack replied. She stood still for a moment, then returned to her room, pulling the blanket over her head, trying to stifle her sobs so no one would hear. The lights remained on downstairs. In his study, Richard sat in front of his laptop, his face buried in numbers. In another corner of the house, Madeline locked the kitchen door, glancing upstairs, her eyes holding a strange expression, as if she were keeping a secret. And on the upper floor, a child lay awake in silence, waiting for someone to come. But no one came. As time went on, Lily's changes could no longer be hidden. The clothes that once fit snugly were now loose. Her sleeves almost covered her thin hands. Her cheeks, once round, were now hollow, her skin pale and lifeless. Mrs. Turner was the first to realize it. She no longer saw Lily smiling at breakfast, nor heard the hurried footsteps running down the stairs when her father came home. Every evening, while clearing the table, she saw Lily sitting silently, staring at her bowl, the spoon resting untouched in her hand. When prompted, the girl would softly reply, "I'm not hungry," and sit still until Madeline told her, "That's enough, go upstairs and study." At that moment, she would stand up, bow her head, and rush away as if afraid of being called back. Richard also noticed the difference, but he didn't know where to start. When he asked Madeline, she told him, "Lily is going through a transitional phase. Children this age are sensitive. Change is normal." Her gentle, rational tone somewhat reassured him. Madeline always knew how to make everything sound reasonable, and Richard, as busy as ever, didn't question her further. One morning, as he was about to leave the house, Richard caught Madeline inspecting Lily's lunchbox. She opened the lid, used a spoon to scoop out some of the egg and vegetables into a bowl, and put it in the fridge. He looked at her for a few seconds, about to ask when she turned back, smiling. "It's easier for her to digest if she eats less. Don't worry, I know best." Richard smiled and nodded. He still didn't understand that sometimes someone else's smile is just a way to hide what he didn't want to see. At school, the whispers started to spread. A cafeteria worker mentioned that she had often seen Ms. Brooks, Madeline, asking for the previous day's leftovers to be kept for Lily. Sometimes she even made the girl eat the cold remnants because waste is not allowed. When asked, she simply said it was discipline training. Other teachers heard this, but everyone avoided the topic. As Madeline was favored by the principal and was the wife of a major school donor, Lily became increasingly withdrawn. In class, she spoke little and no longer participated in drawing as before. The unfinished sketch of her mother, the drawing she once cherished, was now hidden in her desk drawer, covered with a thin layer of dust. She sat at the back of the class, her gaze always directed downward, her hands clasped together beneath the table. One day, Emily, her desk mate, offered Lily a small cookie, softly asking, "Aren't you having lunch?" Before Lily could answer, Madeline appeared right behind them. She placed a hand on Lily's shoulder, her voice even. "The girl needs discipline. No one helps her with impulsive kindness, Emily." The whole class fell silent. From then on, no one dared to ask anything more. Night came, and the house was quiet. Lily often woke up midway through the night, clutching her stomach, stepping onto the balcony. The pain made her tremble. Mrs. Turner, hearing the soft sounds from the opposite room, put on her robe and went out. Lily sat huddled on the steps, her bare feet touching the cold tile. Without asking, the housekeeper just placed a cup of warm water nearby. The girl softly said, "I'm fine," then rested her head on her knees, staring wide-eyed into the dark. Mrs. Turner sat quietly beside her, her heart aching, but she didn't know what else to do. When Richard returned from his long business trip, he finally noticed. His daughter was noticeably frail. He decided to take her to the doctor, but Madeline objected. "She's just tired from studying too much. Taking her to the doctor now will make her think she's sick, which isn't good for her mentally." He hesitated, then backed down. That evening, the family ate dinner together. Madeline had made a pumpkin cream soup, lightly scented with butter. Lily only took a few spoonfuls, then set the spoon down. Just as Richard was about to ask, the girl subtly bent forward and expelled a little of the soup. Mrs. Turner quickly stood up, but Madeline was faster, grabbing a tissue and cleaning the table. "It's nothing. Perhaps she ate too quickly," she said, gently leading Lily upstairs. Richard stood up, clearly bewildered. He turned to Mrs. Turner. "I don't understand. The girl looks exhausted." She was about to tell him what she observed, but Madeline returned, placed a hand on his shoulder, and spoke calmly. "Don't worry. Just let her rest early. Don't stress her out more." Richard nodded, saying nothing more. When Lily was put to bed, Mrs. Turner followed, seeing the girl lying on her side, hands clenched tightly to the edge of the blanket. Her lips moved but made no sound. The housekeeper stroked her hair, feeling the cold sweat soaking her hand. She gently pulled her hand away, softly saying, "Just sleep. You'll feel better in the morning." In the hallway, Richard looked through the crack of the door, seeing Madeline adjusting the blanket for his daughter. He felt a warmth in his heart, as if she truly cared. He didn't know that right after he left, her smile vanished, leaving only an empty stare. After dinner, Richard went out onto the balcony, making a call to a business partner. The light from the phone illuminated his face, making the dark circles under his eyes even more apparent. A fleeting thought of Lily's strange look crossed his mind, but the incoming call tone quickly dissolved the thought. Work pulled him away. As always downstairs, the kitchen light was on. Madeline washed the dishes, each movement deliberate. When she heard the sound of the study door closing, she dried her hands and walked into the hallway. The nightlight in Lily's room cast a dim yellow glow. She paused before the door, listening. Inside, Lily breathed softly, her sleep fitful. The door creaked open. The sound of the hinge was light enough for a cold draft to seep in. Madeline stepped in, her shadow stretching long across the floor, gliding past the small chair and stopping by the bed. She leaned down, looking at the pale face of the sleeping child. After a moment, she tucked the blanket in, her eyes pausing at the small photo on the nightstand, a picture of Lily with her birth mother. She picked up the photo, stared at it for a long time, then placed it back, face down. After that, she adjusted the nightlight and left the room, closing the door softly. The house fell into silence. Richard was still talking on the phone on the balcony, his voice measured and cool. Mrs. Turner lay restlessly in her room, listening to the wind outside the window. Upstairs, Lily stirred, opened her eyes, and saw the room darkening. She reached out from under the blanket, grasping the photo that had been flipped over, and turned it right side up. In the dim light, her mother's face appeared under the soft glow. She whispered, almost soundlessly, "I miss you, Mom." Mrs. Turner was startled awake by a faint sound coming from Lily's room in the middle of the night. She stepped into the hallway, her heart pounding, and stopped before the slightly ajar door. Through the sliver of light, she saw Madeline bending over Lily's bed. The two figures merged into one shadow, strangely silent. She stood still, hardly breathing, until the sound of the hinge echoed and Madeline stepped out, closing the door as gently as if no one had been there. The next morning, Lily woke up late. Her face was ashen, and the collar of her shirt had a yellow stain, like spilled broth. She sat silently at the table, her hands clutching the spoon without touching the food. Mrs. Turner asked softly, but Lily just looked down, not answering. When Richard came down, he noticed his daughter looked tired, but before he could ask, Madeline walked over, touching his shoulder gently, and said she had just comforted the girl after a nightmare. "I didn't want to worry you," she said, her smile still in place. Richard paused, unsure what to say. Mrs. Turner watched the scene, her throat tight, and retreated into the kitchen. After breakfast, Richard drove to the office but couldn't focus. Mrs. Turner's voice kept echoing in his mind. She shouldn't be in the girls' room at night. The more he thought about it, the more uneasy he felt. The image of Madeline sitting by his daughter's bed, that gentle smile, it should have reassured him, but somehow it sent a chill down his spine. Mid-meeting, he unconsciously opened his phone, looking at pictures of his daughter. The most recent one was taken 2 months ago, when Lily was still smiling. Now he suddenly realized it had been a long time since he'd seen that smile. He decided to call the family doctor and schedule a full checkup for Lily. The doctor asked for symptoms, and he replied vaguely, "She's been weak lately, can't sleep, eating less." His voice slightly trembled. After hanging up, he took a deep breath, telling himself he needed to discuss this with Madeline tonight. But when he got home, as soon as he mentioned the doctor's appointment, Madeline froze momentarily. Then she quickly smiled. "I don't think that's necessary, honey. She's just studying too hard. Taking her to the doctor now will make her think she's ill." The statement was soft but firm. He nodded, trying to convince himself she was probably right. As he went up to his study, Mrs. Turner walked in, holding an envelope. "You should see this," she whispered. Inside the envelope was a small, crumpled piece of paper, scribbled with childish handwriting. "My tummy hurts often, but the teacher said not to tell." Richard stared at the simple words for a long time. His chest tightened, and his breathing became labored. He asked, "Where did you find this?" "In her desk drawer," she replied. "I thought you needed to know." He said nothing more. When Mrs. Turner left, he remained seated, his eyes fixed on the paper. Each word seemed etched into his mind. Lily's face, pale, silent, and fearful, flashed through his thoughts. A sense of dread washed over him, the strongest he had ever felt. The next day, he arrived at the school early, using the excuse of meeting the principal to discuss funding for the gifted program. After the conversation, he asked permission to walk around the campus. Coincidentally, he passed the cafeteria area. Through the glass window, he saw Madeline talking to a group of canteen staff. She handed them a piece of paper, her expression cold. When Richard appeared, none of them looked at him. They lowered their heads, avoiding eye contact. The sight made him uneasy. When Madeline turned around, she was startled momentarily, then smiled as if nothing was amiss. "You're here early?" she asked. "I thought I'd stop by," he replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "I'm just giving instructions for the special needs student menu," she said, adjusting her collar, her voice even. "Lily still needs supervision, you know." He nodded, but his eyes followed the employees who had quickly walked into the back kitchen as if avoiding something. Leaving the school, he sat in his car for a long time, gripping the steering wheel without starting the engine. The wind rustled the leaves, tapping against the car window. In his mind, fragmented memories began to surface. Mrs. Turner's complaints, the stain on his daughter's shirt, Madeline's evasiveness, the crumpled note with the naive handwriting, everything began to fit together, forming an image that made his heart race. He called his personal assistant, his voice hoarse. "Cancel everything for the next 2 days, no visitors, no meetings." "Yes, sir," the other end replied. But he had already hung up. The car moved slowly back toward the school. He couldn't hear the engine anymore, only the frantic pounding in his chest. When the car stopped at the gate, he turned off the ignition and rolled down the window. The afternoon breeze carried the smell of communal cooking from the kitchen area. Through the trees, he saw Madeline just entering the cafeteria, carrying a food tray. On the tray was a small portion of plain rice with a little cloudy soup. She walked slowly, stopping at the corner table where Lily sat alone. Richard sat motionless, his eyes glued to the scene. The feeling of dread in him was no longer vague intuition. It was clear, sharp, like an invisible hand tightening around his heart. He didn't know what he would do next, but he knew that from this moment on, he would no longer trust blindly. Inside the car, the clock showed almost noon. He opened the door and stepped out, clutching the keys so tightly that the metal imprinted on his skin. The school gate was slightly ajar. In the distance, Madeline leaned over the food tray, the light catching her face, highlighting a smile Richard had never seen, a smile that sent shivers down his spine. He stood still, looking through the glass, seeing his small daughter's eyes. Pale, silent, and struggling to swallow each spoonful of the murky soup, a leaf dropped onto the car hood, light yet heavy. In that instant, Richard knew that his doubts were no longer just doubts. They were turning into a solid truth, and he, the blind father, had finally seen it. Richard stepped out of the car, his hand lightly squeezing the phone in his pocket as if to steady himself. He walked straight toward the principal's office, maintaining his usual calm composure. "I'd like to surprise my daughter and join her for lunch," he stated, his voice soft but firm. The principal smiled, entirely unaware of the unusual request, and eagerly instructed someone to lead him down to the cafeteria. The path led through a long corridor, its walls decorated with vibrant children's artwork, but to Richard's eyes, everything seemed covered in a dull haze. As he got closer, his steps slowed. The atmosphere felt wrong, an awkward stillness. The clatter of cutlery on trays was sporadic, small fragments of conversation swallowed by the emptiness. He stopped outside the large glass window, the light reflecting off his taut face. At the end of the room, Lily sat alone at an isolated table. She was so small, she looked almost swallowed by the vast space. In front of her was a silver plastic tray containing only cold, plain rice and a bit of murky broth, with shreds of vegetables floating on top. By the serving counter, Madeline held a stainless steel ladle, her face calm as if performing a routine duty, but her action drew hushed attention. She scooped up a portion of cold, leftover food from another student's tray and dumped it directly onto Lily's. The liquid splashed, hitting the child's wrist. Lily flinched slightly but dared not cry out. Madeline said something, her lips pressed into a thin line, then she turned and walked away, her posture rigid as a taut wire. Lily lowered her head, her hands clenched on the table edge, her shoulders trembling slightly as if trying to stifle a reaction. At a nearby table, a little girl started to stand up, but a cafeteria worker signaled her to keep silent. The entire room was gripped by a suffocating stillness. Richard stood motionless outside the door, his heart slamming against his ribs. Everything before him seemed to slow down. He opened the door and walked in. The sound of his shoes on the floor echoed like a series of hammer blows. All the students turned their heads, Madeline started, the fake smile that had been forming instantly fading. He walked straight toward his daughter. Each step felt heavier, his eyes never leaving the food tray that smelled faintly of cold remnants. He stopped in front of Lily and swept the tray aside. The sound of metal hitting the table made everyone jump. No one dared to breathe. Lily looked up. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her lower lashes wet. When she saw her father, she trembled slightly. Her lips parted as if she wanted to say something, but couldn't. Richard bent down, scooped her up, his arms tightening around her as if to shield her from the entire world. A group of teachers approached, confused about what to do. Richard didn't utter a word. His gaze was cold, sharp, and controlled. He turned to the trembling canteen worker holding the ladle, signaling with his eyes, "Don't touch anything." The woman understood instantly and quietly nodded. Madeline tried to maintain her composure. She walked over, forcing a strained smile. "You misunderstand. This is just a disciplinary meal. The girl needs to learn to appreciate food." No one believed her. Even the students in the room looked down, afraid to watch. A cafeteria worker clutched the edge of her apron, her eyes tearing up. The air was thick, heavy, as if about to break. The principal appeared, breathless after receiving the news. He looked at the scene, Lily in her father's arms, the scattered food tray, Madeline standing frozen, and found himself speechless. What is going on?" he asked, his voice choked. No one answered. A student at the back table subtly took out a phone and captured the scene. The quiet click echoed in the silence, startling Madeline into turning around. Richard held his daughter close, feeling her weak heartbeat against his chest. He looked around, his gaze sweeping across every face, from the canteen workers, the students, to the principal. No one dared to meet his eyes. Everything spoke volumes about the truth he had ignored for so long. He turned to Madeline, his voice low but precise. "You are not to go near her again." Madeline stood stiffly, her face momentarily distorted. "You are misunderstanding." She tried to argue, but Richard had already turned his back, carrying Lily through the long corridor. His footsteps were measured and decisive, followed by the heavy breaths of the witnesses. Other teachers moved aside. No one dared to interfere. The scene felt like a boundary being drawn between justice and the concealed truth. Stepping out of the cafeteria area, a strong gust of wind swept through the hallway, lightly fluttering Lily's jacket. Richard held his daughter tighter. She buried her head in his shoulder, her breathing ragged. He felt her body was icy cold. Inside, the principal turned to Madeline, his eyes filled with astonishment. "Explain yourself. What is happening?" Madeline offered a faint laugh, trying to regain her calm. "I was only teaching the child to be grateful." "By doing that," a canteen worker blurted out. The voice echoed in the room, making everyone jump. Madeline whirled around, her look fiercely cold, but this time, no one lowered their gaze. Richard walked out of the building, his breathing still unsteady. He placed Lily in the back seat of the car, carefully securing the seatbelt, then leaned in to look at her. "It's okay. You're safe now." Lily didn't speak. She just gripped his sleeve tightly, silent tears streaming down her face. He looked up, catching sight of Madeline standing at the cafeteria doorway through the rearview mirror. Her face was pale, her lips tightly sealed, her eyes a mix of panic and defiance. The wind tousled her hair, messing up her carefully constructed smile. Richard opened the car door and got into the driver's seat. His phone vibrated softly in his hand. He looked down. The screen displayed a video recording of the entire scene in the cafeteria. Someone had sent him a copy. He hit the save button without a word. The engine started, and the car slowly began to move. In the rearview mirror, Madeline's figure shrunk until she was just a blurry shape in the doorway. Lily huddled against her father, her body shuddering with small, suppressed sobs. Richard reached back and gently patted her back, feeling her chaotic heartbeat in his palm. He looked straight ahead, the road stretching into the distance. In his mind, all the fragments of memory converged, the cold meals, the deceptively gentle words, the smooth smile. All now became vivid evidence of the cruel truth he had ignored for too long. He pulled over near the entrance gate and turned off the engine, sitting still. The silence in the car was so profound, he could hear Lily's soft breathing. He opened his phone, watching the video one more time. Each frame was a stab to a father's dignity. When he put the phone away, his hands were still shaking. He knew that from this moment, everything had changed. Not just his relationship with the wife he had trusted, but his own identity, the man who had been too blind to see what was happening right before his eyes. Outside the car, the wind picked up, violently flapping the sign that read, "Student Canteen, where students are loved." The words rattled mockingly in the wind, a bitter irony for everything that had just occurred. Richard took a deep breath, gripping the steering wheel again. Behind him, Lily let out a small sob, then leaned back against the seat. He turned around, gently touched her hair, and whispered, "Dad's here now, you don't have to be afraid anymore." And as the car door closed, only the sound of the wind whistling through the trees remained, mingling with the heartbeats of two people, a child who had just escaped the darkness and a father who had just awakened from his self-imposed blindness. The car sped away in silence. The wind rushed past the window, carrying the heavy breaths Richard struggled to contain. His hands clenched the steering wheel, his knuckles white. In the passenger seat, Lily sat huddled, her knees drawn up close to her body. She stared out the window, her eyes hollow. Richard briefly glanced at his daughter. The sunlight highlighted her small face, exposing her pale skin and dry lips. A sharp pain pierced his heart, and only when he saw her shoulders tremble did he realize she was trying to stifle her crying. He reached out, but his hand stopped mid-air. As if he didn't know how to offer comfort, he didn't speak until the car stopped in front of the hospital. Lily walked obediently beside him, her small frame swallowed by her oversized jacket. In the examination room, the medical team worked quietly. When the results were placed on the table, the doctor sighed, speaking slowly. "The girl is severely malnourished, has stomach ulcers due to prolonged stress, and shows signs of sleep disorder. You need to ask if anything at home or school made her fearful." Richard remained silent. Lily sat on the examination bed, her hands fiddling with the edge of the blanket. When she heard the doctor's question, she slightly shook her head, then turned her face away. "That tiny movement felt like a knife twisting in his gut. He understood that every word Madeline had spoken was a lie. In the waiting room, the air was thick. Richard leaned back against the chair, his eyes fixed on the window glass that reflected his own haggard face. On the bed, Lily lay on her side, her small hand still gripping the corner of the blanket. Every time a nurse walked in, she would startle, then pretend to sleep. The sight choked him up. When the nurse left, he gently leaned down and stroked her soft hair, which was stiff with cold sweat. Her breathing was steady but labored. "Dad's here," he whispered, but his voice cracked midway. He realized he had never truly been present for her, never listened to her stories, never noticed the fear in her eyes. The image of Madeline smiling, her voice sweetly saying, "She is very well behaved at school," emerged like an indelible stain. He remembered the times Mrs. Turner tried to say something, only for him to dismiss her with, "You worry too much." Now, all those memory fragments piled up, heavy as a stone block on his chest. He opened his phone, retrieving the video from the cafeteria. The image of Madeline standing over the food tray, scooping leftovers onto Lily's tray, her hand stiff as a machine, and his daughter, head bowed, silently enduring it. He watched until the very last second, his hand trembling, then tears spilled onto the screen. Without hesitation, he dialed his private lawyer, sending the video along with a brief message. "I want this handled immediately. It must not be buried like other cases." On the other end, the lawyer simply replied, "I understand, sir. I'll be at your house tonight." He turned to Mrs. Turner, who was standing at the door, her face etched with worry. "Please stay and look after her. I need to go back to the school." "What about Madeline, sir?" Richard looked up, his gaze so cold it made her shiver. "I'll take care of it." The sky outside was overcast. When Richard returned to the school, the iron gate slowly opened, the sound of the hinges drawing out like a lament. He walked into the main building, each step weighted with memory. The principal and a few teachers were present in the meeting room. They stood up when they saw him, their faces a mix of anxiety and fear. Richard said nothing, just placed his phone on the table and played the video. The room fell into silence, only the sound of the stainless steel ladle clanging against the tray, echoing through the small speaker. When the video stopped, no one could utter a word. The principal stammered, I didn't know, Miss Brooks." Richard cut him off. "No need for explanations, I just want to know, how many people saw this and kept quiet?" No one answered. A teacher near the door lowered his head, his voice so small it was almost inaudible. "I once saw her punish Lily. She made the girl kneel in the classroom for not finishing her meal. I was afraid of losing my job, so I didn't dare say anything." The confession was like a spark igniting the air. A few others began to look at each other, their eyes filled with remorse. But Richard didn't care anymore. He picked up his phone, buttoned his jacket, and walked out of the room. As he walked down the corridor, the wind blew strongly through the windows. Outside, the schoolyard was empty, the trees swaying violently in the cold wind. He stopped, looking up at the second floor, where Madeline once stood, watching the students with her fake empathy. For the first time, he clearly felt the emotion he had only heard others describe: utter fury. He walked out to the parking lot, opened the car door, but didn't start the engine immediately. Sitting still, he rested his head on the seat, closing his eyes. The sound of the wind outside blended with the frantic pounding in his chest. In that moment, he realized one thing. From now on, he wouldn't let anyone, absolutely anyone, hurt his daughter again. He opened his eyes and started the car. The rearview mirror reflected the school entrance. There, Madeline had just walked out, her face deathly pale, her eyes wide as she saw his car stopped by the gate. Richard didn't look at her again. He turned the car around, the wheels slowly rolling on the wind-swept road. Every time he pressed the accelerator, it was a silent vow that this pain would not fade into silence like before. In the distance, the sky darkened. A light rain began to fall, spreading across the windshield, and amidst those raindrops, Lily's face reappeared in his mind, frail but alive. That was enough for him to move forward. The car door closed with a dry thud. Outside, Madeline stood frozen in the schoolyard, her handbag still clutched in her hand. In her panicked eyes, Richard knew she understood, that everything was no longer in her control. A few days later, Madeline showed up at the Coleman Mansion gate on a gloomy afternoon. Her coat was disheveled, her heavily powdered face looked sickly pale, and her hands were clutching her purse, trembling. When Richard stepped out, she tried to speak calmly. "You misunderstood, Richard. Everything at school was just a way to teach children discipline. I didn't mean to harm Lily." He stood still, his eyes devoid of emotion. A long silence passed before he replied, his voice even and cold. "I've watched the entire video and listened to all the testimony. Do you have anything else to say?" Madeline bit her lip, stepping back slightly, but still trying to smile. "You know I care about the girl. Sometimes you have to be strict." "Enough," Richard cut her off, his gaze freezing her in place. "You will leave this house today." When the door closed behind her, the household remained silent. Mrs. Turner took Lily from the sofa up to her room, and Richard called his lawyer. He sent the entire video, photos, and the cafeteria workers' testimonies to the police. His voice was resolute. "I want to file for divorce immediately, and I request a temporary restraining order. She is not to come near my daughter." Within hours, the paperwork was delivered. Madeline had to vacate the mansion that day. When the police arrived, she still pleaded, tears streaming down her face, but Richard stood silently, saying nothing. For the first time, the man who had always been so gentle allowed his rage to surface, not through shouting, but through absolute silence. The news spread like wildfire. Most local papers ran headlines like, "Teacher accused of mistreating stepdaughter. Millionaire Richard Coleman files for emergency divorce." Social media was flooded with comments. Everyone was outraged, some pitying Lily, others blaming the school. While the media scrambled for answers, Richard refused all interviews. He dedicated all his time to his daughter and worked with his lawyer to finalize the criminal complaint. He had all the school camera footage extracted, saved employee testimonies, and contacted the parents of Lily's classmates. Initially, many were hesitant, fearing for their jobs. But when Richard promised, "I will protect you if you dare to speak the truth," one by one, they came forward. The official investigation began. The police discovered that Madeline had a history of similar complaints at her previous school, which had been covered up due to connections. This time, no one could conceal it anymore. Meanwhile, Lily was being treated at the hospital, cared for by a specialized team. The doctor advised that she needed long-term rest and psychological therapy to regain trust. During the first few nights, she still woke up startled, but seeing her father sitting beside her, her eyes would gradually soften, and she would fall asleep in peace. Richard stayed by her side all night, never leaving. He brought his laptop, handling work from the hospital room, with just enough space for a chair. Every time he looked at the bed and saw Lily sleeping soundly, he felt how much he owed her. The next morning, holding a newspaper featuring a picture of Madeline being escorted from the school, he felt no relief. On the front page, the bold headline took up half the space. "Former teacher charged with child maltreatment." He folded it and threw it into the trash, not out of forgiveness, but because the attention no longer mattered. He only wanted his daughter to smile again. The preliminary court hearing took place within a few weeks. All the evidence was undeniable. Madeline was charged with child abuse and misuse of authority. A 2-year prison sentence was handed down in the packed courtroom. She screamed, blaming the press and her husband's misunderstanding, but no one was listening anymore. She was permanently stripped of her teaching license. The school where she worked issued a public apology, admitting to serious lapses in supervision. The press hailed Richard for daring to stand up for his daughter and called him the steadfast father in an indifferent age. But he didn't read any of the articles. When his lawyer offered him an exclusive interview contract, he simply shook his head. "I don't need accolades. I only need my daughter to live in peace." After Lily was discharged, he made arrangements to simplify their life. He handed over the company's reins to his vice president and declined all collaboration offers. Within days, the vast mansion, once filled with footsteps and silence, was emptied. One morning, Mrs. Turner helped Lily pack. The girl selected only a few small items, a box of paints, an old teddy bear, and a drawing her mother had made. When Richard asked where she wanted to go, Lily just pointed out the window, where green trees reflected in the distant lake. He smiled and nodded. The car left the city that afternoon. The road was shaded by trees, the wind through the windows carrying the scent of damp earth and fresh leaves. Richard drove slowly, his eyes following the last rays of sunlight stretching over the road ahead. Lily sat beside him, hugging her teddy bear. She didn't speak, but a hint of color had returned to her face. In the rearview mirror, the Coleman Capital headquarters slowly shrunk against the gray sky. The city faded away, leaving only thin wisps of smoke rising from distant rooftops. Richard gently took his daughter's hand. "We're going to start over, okay?" Lily nodded, her clear eyes reflecting the sky ahead. The car rolled further away from the past, carrying two damaged souls, a father learning how to begin anew and a child learning how to trust in love again. The small house nestled among tall pine trees had only 3 rooms and a small garden leading to a wooden dock by the lake. Yet for Richard, it was the first place he truly felt peaceful since losing his wife. Mornings here began with the soft sound of the wind touching the water's surface and sunlight streaming through the kitchen window, casting a golden glow on the oak dining table. He started relearning seemingly simple things: how to cook, how to make tea, and how to prepare breakfast for Lily. At first, the food was clumsy. Scrambled eggs were slightly burnt, toast a bit dry, but seeing his daughter's soft smile, he felt it was the most perfect breakfast of his life. Although Lily could only manage a few small spoonfuls, Richard knew she was slowly opening up. Mrs. Turner also moved in, serving not just as a housekeeper, but as a beloved grandmother figure to Lily. She planted new flower beds along the walkway, and every afternoon, when the wind blew, the scent of lavender filled the house, making the space vibrant with life. Each week, Richard took his daughter to see a therapist in the nearby town. In the first sessions, Lily sat quietly, answering only in short phrases. But gradually, she started sharing stories, talking about her drawings, about the small bird that often landed outside her window. These small changes made him realize that healing doesn't come from time, but from presence. In the evenings, father and daughter often sat by the window, watching the lake change color. Richard would read, while Lily used watercolors to sketch the scenery. One day, it rained, and she placed her paper outside on the porch to catch a few drops, saying it was the true color of the sky. He chuckled, and from that laughter, the old distance vanished. One afternoon, entering her room, Richard saw Lily bent over her desk, a new painting in front of her on the paper. 2 people stood side by side under a bright sky, with a small, wobbly inscription beneath, "I'm not afraid anymore." He stood silently, his throat tight. Without needing to say anything, he knew he had done the right thing. From then on, Richard withdrew from the business world. He started a foundation with some old friends. To support emotionally traumatized children, they named it Lily's Haven. Whenever the name was mentioned, Lily would smile, her smile as gentle as the wind. The inauguration day took place under a clear sky. Dozens of children held balloons running around the small yard. Richard held his daughter's hand as they went up to cut the pink ribbon. When the ribbon broke, applause erupted, and Lily looked up, her clear eyes reflecting the bright light. The media wrote many stories about them, calling it a symbol of healing love. But when asked for his thoughts, Richard simply smiled and said, "I'm just doing what a father should have done a long time ago." Their lives unfolded peacefully, yet meaningfully. Each week, several children were brought to the lakeside house for art classes and sharing sessions. Lily often sat with them, guiding them on how to mix colors or paint the sky. And in every one of her smiles, Richard saw the image of the girl from years past. But different now, stronger, gentler, and at peace. In the evenings, when the sun set over the lake, children's laughter echoed throughout the garden. Lily ran around the steps, giggling while hugging a new kitten she had adopted. Richard stood by the door, watching the scene, quietly nodding. They both understood. They had navigated the darkest days to find their own light, and to bring light to other children. Night descended, and Lily sat in her drawing room. The desk lamp shone down on the still wet paper. On it, she was sketching a small girl reaching toward the sun. The brushstrokes were unfinished, but enough to show that the painting was as vibrant and alive as her rekindled belief. Outside, the wind blew softly across the lake, reflecting the moonlight like a silver ribbon. In that small house, Richard sat reading, occasionally looking up to listen to the sound of his daughter's paintbrush. Time went by, and the leaves around the lakeside house changed colors with the seasons. From a girl who feared the school bell and the smell of cold rice, Lily had grown into a mature woman, carrying the gentleness and resilience she had once longed for in adults. She became a licensed psychological counselor, continuing the mission of Lily's Haven, the place that had saved her own childhood. The lakeside house was now the small center of the foundation. Every day, Lily saw dozens of children for therapy. She understood the feeling of being hurt, so she never rushed anyone to speak. Sometimes she would sit in silence with a child for the entire session, waiting until they were willing to look up. That patience earned her the affectionate title, the listener with a heart. News of Lily spread, and she was invited to attend a national education conference. In the large auditorium, brightly lit, hundreds of teachers, parents, and journalists filled the seats. When the host introduced Ms. Lily Coleman, founder of Lily's Haven, a symbol of resilience, the applause was prolonged. Lily stepped onto the stage in a simple white dress. She looked out at the audience, took a deep breath, and began to tell her story. A story no one expected was her own painful memory. She spoke of a little girl who once feared the sound of the school bell, the smell of cold rice in a tray, and most of all, the eyes of the person everyone thought was kind. She spoke of the father who was once too busy to realize his own daughter was slowly fading away in fear. Her voice was steady, not shaking, as if reciting a closed chapter of an old book. The auditorium was quiet. No one dared to interrupt with even a small noise. She stated, "Every child deserves to be seen with loving eyes, not judgmental ones." When the sentence rang out, many people bowed their heads, some were moved to tears. The lights shone on her face, illuminating her clear eyes, eyes that had once seen darkness, but chose to believe in the light. In the back row, Richard sat quietly, his hair significantly grayer, his face marked by time, but his eyes were brighter than ever. He didn't need to speak, because just seeing his daughter standing there, he knew all the mistakes of the past had been redeemed, not with money, but with her own resilience. When the ceremony ended, the organizers presented Lily with the Inspiration for Change Award. The entire hall gave her a standing ovation. Lily bowed in thanks, the lights shining down, making her smile radiant like the dawn. The media uniformly hailed her as the one who rekindled childhood. But Richard just stood up, quietly applauding while his eyes moistened. He knew that true happiness didn't require applause. Just the feeling of seeing his child happy was enough. That evening, father and daughter returned to the lakeside house. The road was still shaded by pines as always. When the car stopped, Lily opened the door and stepped out, the scent of damp earth mixed with lavender from the old garden rushing out to greet them. They made tea and sat on the porch, watching the tranquil lake reflect the moonlight. The crickets chirped, the soft lapping of the waves against the shore sounding like the breath of time. Lily rested her head on her father's shoulder, and he placed his hand on her hair, his heart filled with the peace he had searched for his entire life. They didn't need to speak, but both understood. The past was closed, and the future was opening up with a gentle, enduring light. On the small table near the window, there was an old painting Lily had made as a child. Richard had framed it. A picture of father and daughter holding hands by the lakeside, with a brilliant sun spreading its light across the sky in the distance. That light, though faded with time, still seemed to emanate the warmth of memory. A gentle breeze blew through. The scent of lavender from the garden mingled with the laughter of a few children playing outside, children Lily hosted for weekend art classes. They ran around the steps, tossing a ball under the moonlight. Richard looked at his daughter, softly smiling. And Lily, catching his eye, just nodded gently, a thank you that needed no words. In the drawing room, the desk lamp still shone on the new paper. Lily sat by the easel, the brush moving slowly. On the paper, the image of a small, brightly lit home gradually emerged, with children laughing on the porch, and in the center, two figures, one tall, one small, sitting, looking out at the lake. Richard stood outside the door, watching his daughter in silence. He didn't want to break the moment. A slight breeze blew through, gently stirring the curtain. Lily looked up, saw her father, and smiled. "What are you painting?" "A home," she replied softly, "where everyone feels safe." Richard nodded, stepping in, looking at the unfinished painting. The sun in the drawing radiated golden-orange rays, reflecting on the faces of the two figures in the sketch. He realized, this time she wasn't painting a child standing in the light anymore. She was painting herself, the one who had become the light for others. They sat there together until late. Outside, the lake shimmered under the moonlight, reflecting like a mirror. In the small room, the lamp remained warm. No darkness was strong enough to overshadow them. Lily set down her brush, looking at the finished artwork. She whispered, as if to herself, "The light never disappears. Sometimes it just takes time to find it again." Richard looked at his daughter, his eyes full of pride. He placed his hand on her shoulder, gently squeezing. That night, the wind whistled through the pine trees, carrying the lingering scent of lavender. Children's laughter echoed from the porch. In the small lakeside house, the golden light from the drawing room spread everywhere, blending with the moonlight outside, a light of forgiveness, of affection, and of souls who had found their way back to themselves. And that is our bedtime story for today. A journey from shadow to light, from carelessness to affection and healing. Were you moved by the moment Richard truly awakened, or by the final smile of Lily, the girl who was once fearful, but who now brings light to others? In your opinion, which character impressed you the most? Richard, the father who dared to confront his mistakes to reclaim his daughter, or Lily, the strong little girl who learned to forgive and heal herself? Please share your thoughts on this story. I would love to know what touched your heart as you listened. Comment below so we can chat more about the beautiful things the story offers before we conclude a long day.